it's a really interesting area. And you will have, maybe on the last podcast, I might have mentioned that in terms of corporate governance, all boards need to be aware of it and have a strategy and approach to it. But it's now moved on a little bit, and it links much more, and I think this came up yesterday, to cyber and cybersecurity. The risks of somebody hacking your system or holding you to ransom with a ransomware is getting more and more complex and more slick because of the evolution of AI. And these are the kind of negative elements that perhaps you don't really think about. But if across every industry AI tools are being developed, that also means that the more, let's call them unsavory characters in the world might be using AI to make it much better for their own business model.
Welcome to the Sixsess Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi, everybody. It's Barry Eustance here from the Just Great People podcast from the Sixsess Consultancy. Delighted to welcome for the third time Michael Glanville of Michael Glanville Executive Coaching. The first time you may remember that Michael and I discussed the importance of people in change and transformation. The second time we discussed the importance of remembering to fly the airplane when you have an organizational crisis or any distraction that may take you away from the essentials of running the business and organization. And this third one is going to be very interesting. It's about AI. With no further ado, I'll hand over to Michael to explain why we're having this conversation and the background to it. Michael, welcome once again.
Well, thank you very much. It's brilliant to be here for. Well, we've done 3 of these, so you mentioned keep flying the plane, and that was one of the messages that got the most traction from my podcast, Meeting Amazing Leaders on the Journey to Success. So if you haven't seen it, pop on there because the interview with Barry is absolutely brilliant and worth a while. But yeah, you're right. It's great timing because yesterday I ran 2 panel sessions for 9am Business and We Are Trailblazers at an event in London called the Retail and Hospitality Showcase. And what was interesting is we touched on AI and risk and the development of AI and particularly cyber and cyber development, cyber protection. It's quite a big day, quite a big conversation. But it really occurred to me that actually, the evolution of AI different businesses or its application is being viewed differently by boards right around the world. There are some that are really embracing it. There are some that stand the risks and the opportunities, but are catching at the surface, and there are some still that haven't started. If you've listened to anything that I've talked about previously, one of the things that I'm really interested in is this kind of risk management element around AI and its implementation and how your teams are using it, what kind of information they're putting in, whether you're using protected LLMs or whether you're allowing people to go and use, ChatGPT externally on their phones and that sort of thing. And one person said, I've bought all of these systems for my team, but I've realized that they are still going to put some information into wider systems. So how do I kind of manage that? But what I think I wanted to talk about today on the podcast really is the notion around a disconnect between what's going on in the boardroom with regards to AI and cyber and the risk of cyber and the opportunities and developments in AI, and what's going on in the front end, and whether actually the messaging is consistent across the business. It doesn't matter what size of business, but for example, let's use a really large organization, thousands and thousands of employees. Do your listeners and viewers think that the decisions that they're making around technical advancements and their embracing and use of AI to develop the business and its strategy long term, do they believe that has cascaded now through the business, both from a risks and an opportunities point of view? And if you ask somebody at the front end who's doing the work, do they really understand what the organization is and what the organization's expectations is of them as a person when it comes to embracing AI? And I just think that's a really interesting area. You must have come across this in some of the work you're doing.
Yeah, well, I was discussing with Mark Blackwell, again, another podcast, if you want to look at our now extensive library of podcast recordings, on the grey market in AI within organizations, how people are quietly still getting the phone out and going into ChatGPT, for example, or Gemini.
Other ones are available.
Yeah, and other ones are available to keep the balanced perspective. Yeah, and that it's rather like the digital revolution, the wave that came through the system in the early where suddenly all of these technologies were emerging and these new companies. There was a new company in 99 called Google when we were struggling with Windows 2, or was it Vista, or I can't remember. And the whole thing was very fragmented. There wasn't much husbandry around and control around the use and implementation of technology and the universal adoption, the protocols, and the risks of the stuff that people are using. And I think we're in a very similar place here, aren't we, with AI? Where it's a bit Wild West out there, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. There are some significant advancements in the development of how the tech is being used and then turned into other tools that businesses can buy. And that's quite amazing to see. So there's some very clever people out there that are saying, well, look, across this industry, these are the opportunities. And if we pull those opportunities together, utilizing AI, we can create a product in itself and sell that to businesses within that sector. And so that's amazing because you've got a whole new industry of founders, developers, entrepreneurs that are developing technical solutions backed by the advancements that the bigger businesses have made. You mentioned Google, but there's so many others that are putting so much time and effort and money into it. And it's almost created an additional industry, an additional supply chain. And that's a bit like, as you described, what happened when there was the .com evolution and also the significant growth in the home PC or the development of that. And one of the things I've heard, various things that I've been to actually, is AI is going to take over this and AI is going to take over that, and is AI going to take away our jobs, and what are the challenges and how do we deal with that? Particularly from a training point of view, how do you train junior lawyers to become junior lawyers if AI is doing all the work that junior lawyers previously did? That's a conundrum for each of those sectors and those businesses. But in reality, it isn't a lot different to the internet and its impact on retail in the high street over time. It isn't a lot different to the move away from desktop PCs into laptops so that people became much more mobile and were able to move around. And more recently, is it that much development on from during COVID, us all starting to use Teams and Zoom and all that sort of stuff? There were risks in doing that. People were worried about security or other people joining the meetings, but actually all of these things are embraced over time, and we learn. We're amazing human beings. We learn how to use them, how to facilitate them, how to leverage them for our advantage or our business's advantage, or to be able to sell them and create them into products. So in terms of opportunities, AI is just incredible. But in terms of risks and risk strategy and risk management, it's a really interesting area. And you will have, maybe on the last podcast, I might have mentioned that in terms of corporate governance, all boards need to be aware of it and have a strategy and approach to it. But it's now moved on a little bit, and it links much more, and I think this came up yesterday, to cyber and cybersecurity. The risks of somebody hacking your system or holding you to ransom with a ransomware is getting more and more complex and more slick because of the evolution of AI. And these are the kind of negative elements that perhaps you don't really think about. But if across every industry AI tools are being developed, that also means that the more, let's call them unsavory characters in the world, might be using AI to make it much better for their own business model. And I think that is
I think that's unquestionably the case, isn't it? Essentially, when you consider the capabilities now that are afforded to any user of AI, the ability to use and understand and leverage AI is more or less unlimited. When you were talking about all the risks associated with technological introduction, I hark back to the story of when Stephenson's rocket was introduced and people were told that what would simply happen is that they would die because of the speeds the thing would be traveling at. And yet here we are. The issue is also about not only security, but also regulation and how that can become. We all now know about the term asymmetric in its war context. If you actually take the regulated environment for AI and then the non-regulated environment where you actually have deliberate and bad actors not engaging in the AI regulations, it then potentially puts them at a significant advantage militarily, commercially, and organizationally had an advantage over those who are operating within the regulatory environment. Was that discussed yesterday?
Not particularly regulatory wise. I mean, regulationary change was talked about quite a lot. And interestingly, there was quite a huge focus on environmental legislation and regulation change and upcoming changes in environmental and particularly when it comes to waste management for businesses. Now, you've got to bear in mind, this was food and hospitality was the kind of context of this bit of the conversation. But, the importance of waste segregation has always been an issue for businesses, and obviously it's more cost effective if you can segregate your waste than put it all into one thing. And stuff that doesn't go to landfill, well, that it's more cost effective to deal with the recycling of that. But what was interesting is AI tools are allowing businesses to, even in waste management and recycling and regulatory change, to understand more quickly the impacts on their businesses, because they can very quickly go and look at a very large document, a very large piece of legislation, put in the various parameters about their business and what they do and how they do it, how they want to behave and what their ESG says and all of that. And the AI can come back and say, well, I think we should do this.
Yes.
Well, that's AI decision making, isn't it? That's not everybody sitting around the boardroom like we're used to saying, well, I don't think you're right, Jeff.
No.
This is saying, well, it's obvious. That was you.
Well, it's apparently obvious.
Well,
it is apparently obvious until you go, well, actually, you're wrong because you haven't picked up this. And that happens a lot. I was talking to a client who's in the super yacht industry just very recently, and we were discussing the merits of technical appraisals via AI. And so a very useful exercise, which I encourage each and every listener and viewer to do, is to take something that they're considering and pump into AI how accurate AI's output is in respect of that particular input. In the technical analysis for marine industry, it was between 65 and 85% accurate, or more precisely, 35 to 15% inaccurate. And that's significant.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I love the way it just is so relaxed about you catching it out. It doesn't matter what one you're using. If you're using Copilot, you say, "I don't think you're right." It goes, "Oh, well done, Michael. You've found a solution for me." But of course, it's learning all the time.
Yeah.
So theoretically, it's getting better when we do catch it out, because that's the whole premise of it, isn't it? It's continually learning from the information that it's being given. I'm working with a client at the moment that is developing voice AI, a really interesting product, which moves voice information in a conversational format into segments of the CRM system. So you think about the applications. Maybe you're at a car show and you're talking to a customer, and you tell the AI all the information about the customer in just a normal conversational format. It then formats that into the appropriate boxes in your CRM. That's a time-saving solution. But even that system is constantly, I think they call it Agentic AI. Now, people who are listening to this and know that is correct or not correct, don't shoot me down. But I think that's what it is. It's kind of learning all the time. They're being able to create real life applications and work in the real world to find effective solutions. And that piece of software has developed so fast over such a short space of time, just because of the evolution of that technology.
And the ability for that agentic AI to go in an organization, know everything about the organization, basically in inspecting and investigating all of its systems all of the time and all its communications, and working out the big picture in terms of the organization, which sounds fantastic. But also, as you've discussed, Mike, it's that it's not without its significant risks. And another risk that should be considered out there amongst all the others is, so you're tied into particular AI organization. What happens if suddenly that organization ceases to operate or is bought by another organization? What is the impact? And are they too big to fail? Well, I can go back to 2008 and Lehman Brothers and look at organizations that were allegedly too big to fail and did. So what happens to your organization when the thing driving your AI suddenly doesn't? What's B?
How does that change? And it's not just that, it's confidentiality as well. So you never ask an AI to sign an NDA, do you? But you do ask a consultant to. And the reason you do that isn't just to protect the data within your business. It's because you are building a notional relationship between you and another human being. But you're not working with a human being when you're working with an AI. You're working with a functional system that, to a certain extent, has a mind of its own. So it is really interesting. And to answer your question, or to touch on your question, I think it depends on your business. So if you are a customer facing, wholly focused on service business where the customer can only enjoy the product that you supply by being there and doing it, and there's loads of those, then there's a different risk to you in terms of what AIs you plug in. And, they may be much more around back office efficiency than front of house service. But if you are a business that, it doesn't need to be a tech business necessarily, but if it's a business that lives and eats and breathes on its technology, and your customers interact with you in the main online or in some way that is digitally enabled, then I think, you've got a different risk assessment to write, haven't you? Because if there are elements of the customer journey that are where your suppliers are developing AI systems that may or may not fail, or may not sell to another provider, or they may change their parameters, that is inevitably going to impact on you and your operating model, and potentially, your profitability. And so when people talk about a AI bubble, for example, and most people have stopped talking about that, is it a bubble? But actually, what's the reality of what we're talking about, isn't it? Is if there was a cascade of failures in the supply chain around different AI models that businesses are using that impacts other businesses because of those failures, changes, evolutions, sales, technical problems, power outages, capacity issues, then does a whole industry suddenly grind to a halt? I mean, think about, the big hacks, M&S, and you have to make really fast tactical and strategic decisions when those sorts of things happen to your business. That was a cyber incident, but what if it was an AI incident? What if it was something to do with an AI metaphorical plug being pulled? Do we deal with that in the same way? Does the business continuity plan approach that in the same way? Do the leadership react to it in a different way? Do we insure against it in a different way? These are all questions that are still working around the businesses as it starts to develop.
Yeah, and what is the reversion option if it all goes badly wrong? Having flown big airplanes around the world, we had multiple systems, and at the end of it, we had mechanical methods that we could use to continue to fly the airplane. Just get that in.
Well done.
I think well done. Yeah, but really important. What happens when it all goes wrong, doesn't work, or in this environment, what do we do? How do we focus? How do we deal with the potential for a cyber attack that is really meaningful in terms of global reach and is part of an asymmetric posture by, shall we say, a malevolent party, a state-sponsored attack? And there are plenty of potential candidates who could do that and would do that. What happens next? Was that discussed yesterday?
Not in any particular detail, but I think it's an interesting topic. From a leadership perspective and from a working with senior leaders perspective, it is something that's got to be on the board agenda. It's something that has to be risk managed in the same way as you would risk manage health and safety. And when you do that, to a certain extent, you also insure it. So I think, those conversations in the boardroom around AI and its link to cyber or cyber risk overall, and understanding, where your greatest areas of risks are and what your opportunities are to insure it and how you would deal with it if something came along, is certainly critically important, I think, for any business. And, that element certainly did come up yesterday. And one thing that's one of the panel mentioned, which I thought was a really good point, is that a lot of senior leadership teams, a lot of boards believe that cyber security is an IT issue. Now, a lot of businesses have only got one IT man or guy or girl, they've got a very small team. And it is highly unlikely that individual or those individuals are going to be able to react swiftly and tactically in the event of a really big challenge or a bad actor really getting into your system. And so having a proper business continuity plan where you've got a list of people that can be called at any time, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, that can advise you, whether that's through your insurer or whether that's through a separate connection. And in fact, let's face it, you're self-insuring if you're doing it that way. But having somebody there to be able to come in and forensically analyze the system and help you to walk that journey is just critical. But that isn't, and this was the point made yesterday, that isn't necessarily for the head of IT to make a decision on. That is a conversation for the board or the risk team to say, actually, this needs to be on the agenda really high up as part of our suite of risk management discussions.
Absolutely.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly a business opportunity, I could feel that emerging as you were speaking there, a whole raft of people who come in as the emergency response teams for small organizations, small and large organizations who've been hit by a major cyber attack. And I have no doubt that one will occur, one or more. Look, will occur. They're happening every day. But if there was a concerted attack, or if things escalated in a particular way in a particular region, the potential for a really sustained and very serious attack that could take out multiple systems is by no means out of the picture. That is definitely on the table, I think, is likely to happen. And it would be fair to say that if you actually take where we sit at the moment globally, we are broadly being attacked from all sides, both with cyber and manipulation of the internet, not only by the criminal fraternity, but also by foreign governments simply changing their threat posture to include a very significant cyber component. So this isn't, and by the way, should be absolutely mainstream in terms of risk management, risk control, and threat assessment, shouldn't it, for any and every company?
Yeah, for I think for any business. I mean, it's like any risk, isn't it? You can sit there as a board and scratch your head and say, well, we wouldn't be in business if we really took on board all of these risks. But what you've got to do is effectively manage those risks and have proper effective insurance and control measures in place to allow you to know that each of those risks are appropriately managed. We're talking about AI and cyber and that sort of thing, but actually, this is a principle for just managing, developing, and creating a business. All leadership teams have to go on that journey and think about those kind of that sort of critical path. And it depends on what product you're working on and what industry you're in.
If you actually look right now, you consider. It has been said by people that essentially we've been in World War III since Glasnost was declared. We've simply moved into a different phase. But if you actually consider that, for example, around the UK, there's ships, ghost fleets going around and looking at internet interconnectors and the whole scenario that we're looking at, ultimately, how do you run your business, ? If you don't have the internet?
Yeah. And that question applies to every business. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. I suppose I would phrase it slightly differently, actually, if you'll forgive me. I would say, can you? So rather than how, it's not impossible to run any business without the internet, but have you actually thought about how you would do it? How would you get in front of customers? Can your business survive by, putting somebody on an A board or putting them on the side of the street advertising your product? Maybe, but most people don't think about it that far ahead because the internet's just there, isn't it? It's like switching a light on. You're expecting the power to come through for the light to switch on. And when it doesn't, like, well, what's going on? Have my neighbors not got any electricity? And this can't be happening. It's a completely different level of kind of first world challenge than.
Well, everything stops for tea, doesn't it? Once the internet goes down, once there's an attack, your basic utilities, heating, lighting, electricity, and water stop working. Your phone stop working. What do you do next? Your computer systems don't work. I would encourage everyone to have a little think about that, because we are in an environment where that could happen, either for a short period of time or a prolonged period of time. I suspect if it's taken out, it'll be out for a protracted period of time. What do you do? How do you do it? What's the next stage? How do you survive as an organization? And if that's beyond the realms of your sense of probabilities, then I would suggest that I have flown airplanes where things like map shift had a 10 to the minus 9 probability of happening, and it did. So what do you do when it does? When these 10 to the minus 9 events occur? And it might be that your posture is actually that might happen and it will kill us, but it's a very low probability. Or it might be that you go, do you know what? That's not a bad idea. What would we do? And it's worth throwing into the mix. And maybe it's time to have your AI take an overall risk assessment of your organization and what your resilience is in various scenarios. It's actually, I would have thought, Michael, that AI is probably a very good agent to have a look at that. Iteratively, by the way, was the other word I was looking for when we were talking about AI's propensity to hallucinate. Multiple iterations tend to produce better results. The first one is invariably pretty useless. No, sorry, I overstate that. Can be improved upon. What are your thoughts?
I think everything could be improved upon, whether it's AI or otherwise. If coming back to your question about risk assessment, if you're going to do that, put it into a private LLM rather than out into the wider world. It'd be interesting, wouldn't it? I've never done it, but it'd be interesting to put in, what do you think the greatest risks are for my industry? What do you think the greatest risks are for my business? Based on the public information available, where is my greatest financial risk? And whether you use that information or how you use that information, how you understand it. You said about is it iteratively or intuitively learning, and developing as an iterative process. I don't know. I think it would be interesting to see how it plays that out. I've not really thought of using it as in that.
Well, tell you, I have. I mean, as you know, I'm a very happy and an extensive user of AI, and certainly for the large language models, I put in the prompt, the requirement to not feed me stuff it thinks I want, but actually to give me attributable facts, but also to do a 5 whys analysis internally as part of the prompt, that it goes through and it asks itself the question, why am I giving this information, and reiterating it. And the 5 whys, developed by Toyota, is a very, very effective method of actually getting to the core of an issue. So I commend it to our dear listener and viewer as perhaps something to consider to pop into your AI prompt. But if not, use it within your organization when you've got things that you're chewing on. So what are the other recommendations that came out yesterday, Mark?
From the point of view of AI, is just test what you've got, test your systems. Take the opportunity to give your website a proper overview as to whether GEO, they call it now instead of SEO, the AIs are crawling your system, understanding what it is that you sell, and ranking you at the top of that information. And there are loads of businesses that can do that, can do an assessment for you. And if any of the listeners want to know any of those from yesterday, then let me know and I'll put you in touch. But I think that was really interesting for me because I've got a website. We all have when we're in business. But you assume that when you're working with the likes of Google and you've got your paid ads or your pay per click or whatever your model is, that is going to work best for you as a solution for a period of time. I think the big change with AI is what works best for you as a solution today might be different tomorrow and then different the next day. And that's where businesses are creating opportunities in evolving SEO into new AI systems and then developing websites that can rank more effectively or prompts that can rank more effectively. Interestingly, and this isn't particularly linked to yesterday, I don't know whether you've ever tried this, but ask the AI why each time, but why. So I started this because I was getting really frustrated with LinkedIn. I'm sorry, LinkedIn, but I put into my prompt was, this was a couple of weeks ago. My prompt was, why is it that that LinkedIn is favoring AI generated content than original, authentic video and posts from original, authentic authors? And it came back saying, well, the algorithm's doing this because the AIs have all been structured in a particular way that it works best with the algorithm, and so therefore they're getting more rank and more reach and being put in front of more clients. So I'm thinking, well, that's AI fighting AI. You're just asking an AI to deal with an AI. There's no human element in that. So I just said, but why? And it came back with, well, part of LinkedIn's strategy is to grow its commercial element of what it does, because it's paid advertising coming from the AI stuff. It makes more money. So I said, well, but why? And then it sort of almost paused for a moment and came back with a very, very similar answer, worded in a different way. And I went back and said, so am I right that LinkedIn has now become Facebook? And that's the point where it really started to stumble. So it came back with, well, yes, you're right, Michael. There is an element of LinkedIn that has become much more of a social media platform like Facebook with its advertising and revenue model. But it is still, an important repository for what one might have originally called the Rolodex. I'm using my own phraseology now, for business people to connect with other business people. But it was the kind of pushing and pushing and pushing that started the AI to think about other things, but not really be able to come back with an answer that I was happy with. And I think that's really interesting. If you've got a particular question or something that's frustrating you, put it into the system and then really kind of test the boundaries of how far it's prepared to go in giving you an answer you're satisfied with.
And that is the 5 whys again. In fact, that's exactly what you've just done. And just a name check for anybody who's perhaps under the age of about 40, a Rolodex was an index was an index. It was cards. We used to have them, and they were in a roll. There was a cylinder, and you pulled them through, and the one would pitch up that you wanted. So there were index cards, a Rolodex, wasn't it? Rolodex, roller index. That's what that was. And I have to say that AI stuff generated for LinkedIn being prioritized over real content. This is real content. Michael and I were discussing this before this particular podcast, that one of the reasons we do podcasts that are entirely unscripted is that it's not being AI driven. It is AI supported because the subtitles will come out from AI, but each word and each letter will be checked individually for correctness and for clarity by a human. So it's because it does differentiate between AI and genuine human to human conversation and thought. And I think that's quite important, Michael. What do you think?
I do. And I think strategically it's an interesting move for LinkedIn. You know, if I was sat in the boardroom, I think I would be, in general terms, questioning the merit of moving more into digital and less into the human element of connection, because it doesn't matter if it's LinkedIn or it's another site. There's no need to necessarily focus on them. The principal point around doing business is people buy from people, and you will have heard me say that before. The connection that one has with their own team internally in the business, right across the business, whether it's in the boardroom or front of house. And then that connection and that culture with your customers, your customer base, the relationship with your customers, that is the critical path to securing repeat business. It's the critical path to securing sales. And so if I was in that boardroom, I think I'd be saying, look, there is a place obviously for AI generated content, but the people that are looking at this and engaging with it, they're actually human beings that need to interact with human beings. And, much as we can all post content that has an AI element to it, it is really important that connection doesn't get lost, because in LinkedIn's case, people are trying to do business with people. They're not trying to do business with computers. Yeah. That is what LinkedIn is there for. It's not an advertising platform, in my own view. So I think there must be some really interesting conversations going on there. And it's interesting. I really like YouTube as a platform. And the reason I do is because it's less, what's it giving you? It's giving you the opportunity to have a platform. And it doesn't dictate, to a certain extent, outside of censorship, forget that for a minute. It doesn't really dictate what you are doing. It just gives you a platform to be able to get to in front of a customer or a consumer or a contact or just your friends. But it doesn't guide you on that journey. Whereas some of the social media platforms are creating such content that it's kind of guiding you into a position where do I need to be developing AI stuff for myself, for my business? Is that the way I should be doing business? And you start thinking, well, no, because what I do is all human. It's all about my relationships with people. So I don't want to be forced into doing that. I want to maintain my human element. It comes back to the A-board guy stood on the side of the road. Maybe that should be the future of advertising. Forget the web. The power goes off. No one can use the web. We just go around with like the old days, and we'll probably all still make money somehow.
Yeah, and I think my experience is that broadly speaking, LinkedIn provides the validation for when you're standing in a room next to someone who is serious about talking to you about business, that they can go in, have a look, have a quick check. They understand a lot more about you. It's your online validation and CV, isn't it? But at the end of it, the conversation comes to two people or three people, a group of people communicating honestly with each other about doing something together that has value to both. And I think it would be valuable for LinkedIn and others to keep that front of mind, that that it's about people, which is a topic we started with.
It's back to the people.
Back to
it's
people.
All about the people.
Yeah, change, transformation.
Yeah. And I think every podcast we've done, the two of us, has come back to that point. It's all about change. It's all about people. It's all about culture. And it comes, again, it links to, the evolution of the internet, the invention of the PC. There were still people using it, and it'll still be people using it in the future. So the people bit is really the most important bit.
I'll validate and absolutely support that. Michael Glanville, from Michael Glanville Executive Coaching. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's lovely to see you again. I'll look forward to number 4.
One of the effects of this whole crisis and crises similar to it is that particularly smaller operators are finding themselves with a huge amount to deal with, a very limited window of opportunity, resilience issues, and the need for greater capacity around their thinking processes. And this is something that we've identified with our executive decision acceleration model. can come in and really support small teams who are finding that they need additional thinking, time, capacity, and impartial, objective, independent, and highly informed and professional advice, bringing in with our strategic partners capabilities for change, industrial relations, and so forth. So we're there to support you at any time. And if you'd like to, just contact us. Our telephone number is also on the website, or you can email us, and we'll be delighted to see when and where we can help you through this crisis. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Sixsess Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.